Hello and welcome to the France24 interview. Our guest today is Antony Blinken. He is a former U.S. Deputy Secretary of State. Thank you very much for being with us.
Good to be here. Thank you.
I want to begin with the rising tensions between the U.S. and Iran. Some are hearing the drums of war. How concerned are you?
Well, I don't think we're there yet, but it is concerning. And it's unfortunate because we didn't have to be where we are now. I think it's very unfortunate the United States pulled out of an agreement that Iran, for all of the things that we don't like that it does, was complying with that agreement, with the nuclear agreement. From Iran's perspective, I imagine that at a certain point, if they were no longer getting the economic benefit that they bargained for in making the agreement, then they might decide to resume their nuclear program. That seems to be the point that they've reached.
So Iran has withdrawn from some part of the agreement. They say we're still complying with the agreement. Are you concerned that this could be the last step before Iran effectively gets out of the agreement?
Well, at some point you're either in the agreement or you're not in the agreement. Right. So they've said they're staying in, yet they're starting to do certain things that are prescribed by the agreement. And so at some point, the other parties, the European parties, Russia, China, will have to decide if Iran is, in fact, still complying with the agreement. But what's so troubling about this, Mark, is that it basically puts us back in the situation we were in, potentially, before the agreement was reached. That is, Iran on the threshold of having the capacity very quickly to develop a nuclear weapon, and the United States and other countries faced with that, having to decide what to do about it. Let them do it, or take action to stop them. That was a bad choice. And the nuclear agreement created a third choice, which was actually putting real constraints for a long period of time on Iran's nuclear program. But now, if that's falling apart, we're back to where we started.
Right. I mean, you were obviously very involved as part of the Obama administration. That's right. When the incoming Trump team arrived, did you tell them, well, this is important because if it doesn't hold, then things might unfold?
You know, there's an expression, don't compare me to the Almighty God, compare me to the alternative. What was the alternative to the agreement? And I think, unfortunately, now we may be finding out that the alternative is a bad one, if it leads to greater tension and if it leads to the potential for actual conflict.
You think actual conflict is a real possibility?
It's a real possibility. I don't think soon, but if this continues, which is to say, if Iran decides that it's no longer getting what it bargained for in the agreement, and it decides to resume in full its nuclear program, then we're headed to a very difficult decision for other countries. Do we let Iran move forward and develop that nuclear capacity, or do we take action to stop it?
Right. President Donald Trump has recently asked the Iranian leadership to call him. At the same time, he's accused then Secretary of State John Kerry of essentially sabotaging any efforts to reach out to the U.S. What's your response?
Look, I would hope that the United States and Iran could find a way to talk and hopefully to get back into full compliance, both countries, with the agreement. But it's challenging because the President Trump decided to tear up an agreement that Iran was actually complying with. And I say this cognizant of all the other things that Iran does, the destabilizing activities throughout the region, support for terrorism, its horrific record on human rights. All of those are things we don't like and that it continues to do. But the one thing it actually was doing in good faith was complying with the nuclear agreement. And that's the one thing we've now torn apart. I'm skeptical that Iran will want to talk to the administration, but that would certainly be better than the alternative, which is potentially heading toward conflict.
Right. I mean, who in your analysis is driving the Iran foreign policy file? I mean, there's a lot of speculation that the National Security Advisor, John Bolton, is really in command on Iran. Is this your take?
Look, at the end of the day, certainly Mr. Bolton, Secretary of State Pompeo have very strong and long-held views on Iran.
Regime change.
Well, that's certainly things they've talked about in the past. But I would say that in this case, President Trump is extremely consistent on one thing, and that is his campaign promises. And one of the promises he made was to get out of the Iran nuclear agreement. So he's delivered on that promise. Again, I think that was a mistake. But this is probably as much driven by the president as by anyone else. It's a commitment he made. He's keeping it.
Right.